We're painting a knight. Let's go.
Let's do it.
So it would seem I have an assistant today. Please introduce yourself.
Hello, I'm Mrs. Snakeworks. Do I need to do it like watch that and do it or just read it?
Just read it.
Okay, first up we need a gloss varnish. We're going to be using this varnish by Vallejo. Then using his airbrush, Marcel applied the gloss varnish to all the armour panels. With the gloss applied, it's shiny but we have to wait for it to dry.
It's a bit like waiting for a girl, like you.
I've been waiting for a girl like you.
Now I love me a bit of foreigner. Do you reckon he's still waiting? Now, some people say the gloss varnish is dry and ready to work on within an hour. But I prefer to wait overnight. It's the only way to be sure.
It's the only way to be sure.
Next, I had a goosey gander at the decal sheets that came with the knight. Luckily, the house I'm doing has decals provided. House Perdaxia. To prep my decal tub, I laid a couple of sheets of tissue paper down and then squirted some water on them to dampen them. Now I used to float them in water, but this method keeps the decals much more manageable.
Then using a pair of scissors, you can use a sharp knife if you want. Marcel cut the decals out we wanted to use on the knight. Marcel then set the decals down onto that damp tissue. It's good to also squirt a little water onto them to help them soak a little quicker. After a few seconds, the decals lift off the backing paper. Just test with the tip of your brush.
That's meant to be a them.
Just test them with the tip of your brush. If they move, they're ready.
Be gentle with them though, as they break easier than wood in Mortal Kombat. Hiya!
Test your might.
This week, while waiting for decals to lift, I have mostly been watching Omegon Edge. He's been doing some wonderful things with oil paints. You should go and check them out immediately.
You'll start to notice that the saturation will drop and be reduced significantly.
The next thing we need is some micro sat. Sadly, I think this has been discontinued, but if anyone knows an alternative, then please let us all know in the comments below. Using a big soft brush, I then apply a layer of microset to where I want the decals to adhere to. I then apply the decals. The best way to do it that I have found is to use a pair of tweezers to hold it next to where you want to apply them and then just slide it off into position. It's easier than trying to carry decals around on brush tips. Trust me, I know. I've broken a lot of decals over the years, usually by trying to carry them on the tip of my brush. This method is a lot easier.
Then using your brush, just guide them into the final position you want them in. Again, be very gentle, you don't want any breakages. When they are in position, we now allow them to dry. If they are overly soggy, you can use a little bit of tissue to wick up the moisture. Marcel didn't bother this time. Have a look at this. These are the decals Marcel didn't end up using. Sometimes you change your mind or find the sizes are not quite right for the area you want to apply them. This happens sometimes, don't worry about it.
Now I found that the decals with black borders didn't work on black panels. Funny that, eh? Oh, and the decals with the black script was just too small, especially when you put them on the big panels. They just looked sort of lost on there. Sometimes with decals, until you offer them up, you never really know if they're going to work. Next up in the firing line is some Microsol, the red one. Again, I think this one's out of print. If you know a substitute, let us all know. Then using a nice soft brush, I apply a layer of the Microsol to all of the decals. Don't flood them though, or they can lift off again, ruining your hard work. I then like to leave them for a while to dry now, preferably overnight. It gives the softener time to perform its magic. Now while waiting for the decals to dry, I've been watching some anime.
This week, it's Cyber City Oedo 808. It's bloody brilliant.
Hey, Benton, don't crap your pants if you see a vampire out there.
Get lost. You wouldn't recognize a goddamn vampire if one jumped up and bit you on the end of your fucking dick.
Now, I was introduced to anime when I was around 12, 13, 14 years old. It used to be on Channel 4 late at night. And I used to stay up late every weekend to watch them. Usually about sort of midnight, 1, 2 in the morning, I think. Did you guys ever stay up late and watch any of those?
We now return to the gloss varnish. Then using the airbrush, Marcel applied a couple of thin coats to each of the armour panels. Don't put too much on or you will get the runs. When the gloss varnish is dry, you end up with a nice shiny surface to work on. It's best to leave it overnight to dry completely.
Now, I tried to work on my gloss panels immediately once and it made a right mess. My thinners started to melt the varnish because it hadn't quite gone off properly, I presume. Impatience can be a pain in the arse sometimes.
Next up, I grab my trusty Tamiya panel liner. You can mix your own out of oils and thinners, but it's a lot easier to have it pre-made. It even comes with its own little brush applicator. Using the panel liner, I then apply it to all of the panel lines. It's funny that. I also add some to each of the rivets for a little shading there too. After a few minutes, we have this, a fully panel-lined panel. If you overspill any, you can just wipe it off with some thinners and a damp brush. You can see the nice contrasting effect that it gives you. Sadly, we don't want this gloss on the final miniature though.
Okay, now it's time to make the knight matte. There's a lot of matte varnishes out there, but I have one that I swear by.
And here it is, our matte varnish of choice, Winter & Newton Galleria Matte Varnish. Then using his airbrush, Marcel then gave the panels a few very thin coats of the matte varnish. Be careful not to put too much on or it actually acts a bit like a gloss again. Also it can frost up. Not nice. Here we have the results of the matte varnish. All the decals and panel liners are now sealed in and we can move on to the trim.
Why do miniatures look so much better when they've been matted down? I saw some gloss miniatures once and I think they looked absolutely awful. They look like boiled sweets. Is it the scale effect? What do you reckon?
Let's return to the trim. We shall begin with Retributor Gold. I like this gold as it's gold, unlike a lot of other alleged golds. I then give all of the trim another coating of the gold. It goes on really well over the matte varnish. Luckily, I only need to apply one coat, as we did a first coat in the previous video, before the varnishes.
Now, speaking of previous videos, I actually thought this video was going to be the final video in the night painting series, but I think there's still one more to go. It's taking a lot longer than I thought. There's a lot more work involved and I didn't want to just whiz through things and skip stuff, if you know what I mean.
Next up, we are mixing Vallejo Model Colour Black and Retributor Gold to make a dark gold. Using this mix, Marcel then painted the back of all the knight's armour panels. We felt it would look more interesting than just black. It actually looks a bit like bronze to me. Here's what it looks like when it's dry. If you were painting Minotaurs, this would be a lovely base colour for them, I think. Much more appropriate than the copper colour some people seem to prefer.
Now, I have to admit, I also tried painting Minotaur Space Marines once. They were a big deal back then for a couple of years. I wonder why that was. Was it to do with the Badab War? I think it was around the Badab War era when Forge World were working on those books. Very good books, I should say.
Next up, it's Drucky Violet. Apparently, it's named after a dark elf thing. I then apply a coat of Drucky Violet to all of the gold trim. Purple over gold sounds odd, doesn't it? But humour me this time, please. With the purple wash applied and dried, we have this. It's darkened down the gold a lot, which is good as it fits the box art for this knight's house.
Now, I spent a great deal of time poring over artwork, trying to figure out just what colour that trim actually was, or is supposed to be. For this House Perdaxia, I just assumed it was like a dirty gold.
Next up, it's a return to Retributor Gold. Marcel then reapplied the gold to all the trim, leaving the purple wash in all the recesses. You can whiz through this part, it's pretty easy. With all that gold applied, you have this. There's rather a lot of trim on this knight, you know. I wonder what painting a Titan is like.
Now, I've never painted a full-size Titan. I find the price is just a little too expensive to justify. Maybe when we hit 10,000 subs on the YouTube channel that we might get one as a sort of reward for our efforts. But we're still a little ways off that.
Right, next up, fan favourite Agrax Earthshade. Same again with the wash. We apply it to all of the gold areas. This will give us a nice blend between the gold and the previous wash step, and also darken down the gold back to the shade we actually want. With that shade applied, we have this. I actually had to add a few layers to the top plate, which you can see on the right, to get the desired effect. It came out spot on, which is handy.
Now, I find painting gold is a little bit weird. Sometimes it looks far too bright, and sometimes it just looks too dark, like a copper or a tin. It seems hard to balance, you know? Wonder why that is. Isn't real gold really shiny, like a buttery yellow? I've never seen a real bar of gold myself. If you want to send me one to check out, then please feel free to do so.
We return again to the Retributor Gold. This time, we just give the armour trim the gentlest of dry brushes to catch the edges and the rivets to help them stand out. It's a tiny step, but makes all the difference. You can see here the effects it's had. I think it looks rather nice. Although we need to sort that star out, don't we?
Originally, I was going to leave that star on the trim there gold, but the more I thought about it, the more I realised I was just being lazy. It gets a bit like that towards the end of painting projects. There's some painting psychology there I need to understand. Why is it fun at the start, and as you get towards the end, when it should be more fun because you're nearly finished, it actually gets more boring and you can't be bothered.
Next up, it's Vallejo Model Air Chrome. It's a lovely silver paint, and it covers fantastically. I then paint the star silver, and also some bits on the knight's head, which you can't see here. This adds a little variation and contrast, which they say the eye enjoys. Here's the completed silver details. I think it's made a huge difference, and sets off the trim rather nicely. You can also see the head bits that I painted silver, the eye socket, and his mouth thing.
Now, in between painting sessions, I spent a long time trying to decide on how to paint the knight's eyes. But I think I've finally decided. You'll see later on, probably the next video. Anyway, that reminds me I need to order the paint to do it.
Next up, we are going to use some null oil.
Nuln. I spelt it wrong.
What?
Nuln.
No. Next up, we are going to use some Nuln oil.
That's it.
We like to keep our washes in pot holders as they have a nasty tendency to fall over and spill, not only ruining what they spill onto, but also wasting money. And that's terrible. Marcel then applied the Nuln oil to all those areas he painted with the chrome to add some shading and definition.
Now, as I'm a bit of an idiot, I never took any footage of that shaded area when it was finished. Either that or I lost it. Either scenario, it's quite possible.
Right, I can't stick the panels on until the base is painted, so let's tackle that next. We begin with Vallejo Model Colour Black. I apply a couple of thin coats of the black to the base. I find it covers a lot better if you thin it well. Luckily, it's black, so it also covers well.
Now, I always find the issue with base coating the base black is it takes rather a long time to dry. What do you guys do while you're waiting for your paint to dry? Did I say waiting?
For the first colour, Marcel shall be using Vallejo Model Colour Light Grey. Can you see the rust in the pot? Amusing indeed. Using a big flat brush, Marcel then dry brushed the entire base with a grey. Don't worry too much if you put too much on, as the next steps will tie it all together. The next colour is Vallejo Model Colour White. We dried the foundation white for this once. Don't do it. It's awful. Again, using the big wide brush, Marcel then gave the base another dry brushing, but not as heavy as the previous layer. You want some of that grey still showing through. Again, don't worry too much though, as there's a couple more steps to go.
Is there a specific Drybrush white paint by Citadel? If so, that actually might be quite good for this. I have a funny feeling they don't make Drybrush paints anymore though. Don't quote me on that. It's just a rumour I think I've heard, but I might have dreamt it as well. They do, however, still make the Cerastus Knight Lancer, which is going dusty already. If you want to get your hands on your own Cerastus Knight Lancer, then check out the link up here somewhere. I'll also put one down in the description below for you.
Next up, it's some Nuln oil. If the base was any bigger, I would have probably had to make my own wash for it. Using a big soft brush, I then apply the Nuln oil to the entirety of the base. You can really slop it on. Just try not to get any on the knight, or so much it pools and runs everywhere. Maybe slopping it on isn't such a good term after all. With that Nuln oil wash applied, we now have to wait 16 years for it to dry.
I normally find the washing stage of a base is a good point to end your day's painting session. You can just leave it overnight to dry, and that'll make sure it's all dry and ready to go in your next session. But what I don't understand is how some people say those washes take 20 minutes to dry. Where do they live? On the surface of the sun? Now, if you want to come and discuss drying times with us in a friendly Discord server that's not behind a paywall, then check out the link up here somewhere. Again, I'll put one in the description below. We look forward to chatting to you there.
We then return to the Vallejo model colour white. Again, using the big flat brush, Marcel gives the base a final white dry brush to increase the contrast. Now, while we put our paints away, I just want to give a massive shout out to all of our Patreons and channel members: Dan Yallop, Lee Blackley, Donald, Pine Tree, Bobzilla, Charles Marlowe, Andrew Marrington, and Dr. Lee. Thank you all so much. We love you all.
Now, you might be wondering why I haven't begun rimming yet, but I'm actually going to rim the knight in the next and hopefully final video. But before we check out the final reveal of where we're up to today, I just want to show you this. This is the Knight's Decal sheet, or Decal sheet. We still don't know how to pronounce it. Anyway, this is one of the two sheets, and this has House Divine on it. And what I especially enjoy is one of their little mottos says, if you're enjoying this video, then please consider liking it and subscribing to the channel. That means you, John. If you are enjoying the content here on the channel, then please consider joining the Patreon, the link to which is in the description below, or up here somewhere. Now, without further ado, let's check out the final finished article. Well, almost final, the penultimate.
So here we are. The knight now has all of its trim painted, decals added, and the base is almost finished. All that's left to do is the head, the banners, which I somehow forgot, and a few effects, which we shall see in the final video, hopefully in a couple of weeks. All in all, I'm really happy with how it's turning out so far, even if it's taken a little longer than expected to paint.
It's taken almost a month so far. If you want to see some more videos in this Horus Heresy painting log, then check out the playlist up here somewhere. And as always, thank you very much for watching. Hiya!